Analysis of Pink Diamond in Steven Universe by Pink Diamond. Note: in the following there are spoilers, so click away now if you don't want spoilers. I refer to Pink a lot as they, and this is meant as in Steven has Pink's memories, and not as any disrespect to Steven wanting to be referred to as he, him. I respect that Steven is he, him, and my using they, there means as in plural form because of the shared memories he has inherited from her, as the convergence of her gem, powers, and memories into Steven. The making of a Pink Diamond. Pink Diamond was imprisoned by guilt and internalized all the behaviors of the other diamonds who were controlled by White, to the point that Pink wasn't allowed to have an identity of her own. White Diamond displays traits of NPD narcissistic personality disorder, and only sees Pink as a flawed piece of herself that needs to be suppressed, instead of seeing Pink as her own person. This is indicated by White's controlling nature and coercive abuse of her subjects, especially Pink. Pink displays traits of ADHD, CPTSD, and even BPD borderline personality disorder. This is marked by her outbursts, running away, literally masking by posing as a rose quartz in order to free herself, and how she'll lose herself in a favorite person, like Pearl and then Greg, to the point of completely changing or really finding her identity, becoming Steven. Steven is like a Christ figure, to pay for all of Pink Diamond's sins. She couldn't live as Pink Diamond anymore after reaching a certain state of consciousness, because Pink Diamond wasn't real. Pink Diamond was pure corruption resulting from the trauma of narcissistic abuse. Instead of shattering, Pink developed the strongest coping mechanisms in order to survive. Her power of coping is even passed on to Steven, with Steven's weapon being S.H.I.E.L.D., and his ability to always run away and find solace with Pink Lion. Pink Diamond was not a real identity. That was an entire coping mechanism and mode of survival in a toxic environment of suppression and reactionary abuse, an extremely damaging form of abuse that brainwashes a person into submission and even delusion through constant provocation, guilt, and gaslighting. Pink's want for a colony of her own represented her need for her own identity, a want for personal freedom. The servant gems on Homeworld were used to guilt and control her, and were part of her imprisonment. She was left in isolation with them, and they were literally programmed and reprogrammed by White to be complicit in the gaslighting and controlling abuse of Pink, because Pink is too powerful to control by force alone. Only by threatening to hurt less powerful gems that Pink loved was White able to control Pink. Pink has both the extreme empathy and emotion of Blue, and the extreme spiritedness and ambition of Yellow. And Pink is the antithesis of White's fixed and controlling mind power. Whereas White can't get out of her own head to the point she's unreachable, Pink is driven by curiosity and whatever impulses and outward influences she feels compelled by at any one moment, like a child. Pink not only has the ability to grow and learn from outside influence, but is compelled to fuse herself to outside influences, almost like a parasite who can't stand in her own power because the power she has was derived from extreme pain, and is too powerful for one entity to control. When White insinuates that Pink is diluting her power by fusing with a human, she's not wrong. But even in her diluted form as Steven, she's still the most powerful diamond. None of the other diamonds combined could withstand being in Pink's shoes with the extreme pressure put upon her. Pink must constantly hold back to stop herself from accidentally destroying the others. This overpowered existence drove her to maddening isolation. The irony of finding herself is that Pink must fuse with a less powerful carbon form in order to stabilize her power and be herself. And even with her power in its more stable form as Steven needs lots of support and validation from quote-unquote lesser gems and humans. Steven seeks validation and connection to the real world through Connie. Connie is the main strong female human character in Steven Universe. When White tries to separate Pink Diamond from Steven, this is also where we see how significant Connie is. Whereas all the gems are overpowered by White Diamond's NPD powers of manipulation, Connie is unfazed, and protects Steven's split half that is human. Connie represents Pink's favorite person, who grounds Pink to reality and validates Pink's identity. Connie does this despite the abuse by White and turning all of Pink's gem support network into her puppets to attack Pink. Pink's BPD symbolism is also shown in full force in the episode of Corrupted Pink Steven, where we see that Pink is still very dependent on a favorite person, Connie. This is why Connie's love and validation is the only power strong enough to get through to Corrupted Pink Steven and temporarily bring them back from a destructive splitting episode, where Pink Steven becomes a giant beast. But this time, the splitting episode is caused by Pink Steven internally from within, splitting on themselves after years of denial of trauma, after years of dealing with an extreme savior complex, fawning and people-pleasing behavior, and undeserved forgiveness of the Diamonds after their repeated abuse and destruction of not only Pink Diamond, but everyone and everything Pink Diamond ever loved. The fear of losing Connie like they'd lost everyone else sends Pink back to their lowest form, a destructive, reactive monster. Pink Diamond, as Pink Steven, also represents self-love through reparenting oneself after extreme childhood trauma and abuse. Connie is so special to Pink Steven because Connie is the fully human version that Pink Diamond wishes to be. Pink as Pink Steven realizes they have to work through all of this pain from their Diamond days, while also accepting that Connie is her own person, with her own life that Pink Steven can't selfishly lose themselves in as a way of dealing with the pain of being part Pink Diamond. This is true love, and Pink Steven, through lessons learned from their outward true love of Connie, now must learn to truly love themselves. Even after making peace with the other Diamonds, Pink, as Steven, never goes back to living on Homeworld and keeps a safe distance from the Diamonds. Steven even has a scary reactive episode where he tries to revisit Homeworld to get help with Corrupted Pink Steven's growing influence over his life. But instead of finding relief, he's triggered by White and Pink. Steven nearly destroys White when given the power to control her. This reminds me of how abused children try to go gray rock or no contact with their abusers after a while because they realize at some point that they can't go back and be fixed by the ones who broke them. In fact, going back will undo all of the healing and rebuilding they've accomplished, because habitual abusers, especially narcissistic ones, are incapable of true empathy and remorse, and the victim will never find true validation with them. All the abusive narcissistic person is capable of doing is twisting the narrative to fit their delusion as the hero and the victim, not any actual accountability and remorse for the horrible things they've done. Admitting to the things they've done and feeling those feelings would destroy them, so instead they mimic empathy with mirroring and mask their boring emptiness with an externalized sense of worth with material things and superficial relationships. The Diamond's quote-unquote love for Spinal is so uncomfortably superficial. Spinal is literally just used to fill the void for the other Diamonds after Pink is gone. Pink, as Steven, quote-unquote, loves White, in that Pink is able to feel sympathy for White, but also knows they must protect themselves from White's control. I foresee the next iteration of Steven Universe, with Steven being even more assertive with boundaries, more reclusive from past provocateurs, and more dependent on Connie, to validate his right to stop being everyone else's mentor and savior, stopping the apology tour, and finally doing what makes Steven happy.